My name is Harper Lee. I am 32 years old, Korean American, and for the last 7 years I have poured every ounce of myself into planning other people's perfect days, while quietly dreaming of my own. I have walked barefoot across marble ballrooms to fix fallen centerpieces, talked sobbing brides off metaphorical ledges, and stitched torn hems with hotel sewing kits while waitstaff set up dinner service behind me. I know how to make magic look effortless. But on the morning of my own wedding, while sitting in a velvet chair with hot rollers tugging at my scalp and the scent of hairspray clouding the room, I received a subject line so bitter it outshone the peonies I had chosen 6 months in advance. Your freedom starts today. That was the email I saw on my phone screen at 8:42 a.m., nestled between a Sephora promotion and a message from my cousin wishing me happiness. At first I assumed it was spam, maybe some philosophical newsletter I forgot to unsubscribe from, but then I saw the sender and everything inside me turned to static. Ryan Caldwell, my boss, the man who once toasted my event skills at a holiday party and called me the backbone of our flagship hotel, had just fired me, on my wedding day. The email was cold and final, filled with phrases like effective immediately and streamlining operations, as if my years of loyalty could be distilled into bullet points and buzzwords. Then, tacked at the end like salt in an open wound, was his personal note. This is a gift, Harper. You can start your marriage with a clean slate. No work stress. You're welcome. I stared at those lines for a long time, the words swimming on the screen, wondering how someone could be that smug and that cruel in the same breath. I had never missed a deadline, never let a bride walk down the aisle late, never asked for more than I earned. And yet, there I sat, in my own bridal suite, with the world outside dressing itself in white and gold, and inside me something unraveling stitch by stitch. The makeup artist paused, sensing the change in me, and asked if I was all right. I nodded with a practiced smile, the kind I gave to brides when the cake came in the wrong shade of ivory. I said I was fine. I said everything was perfect, but inside, a part of me was screaming, not because I had lost a job, but because I had been discarded like confetti after the party ends. My phone buzzed again and I turned it face down. I would still walk the aisle today. I would still say I do, and kiss the man who loved me before I ever had a title. But something had shifted, and as I looked at my reflection, I no longer saw just a bride. I saw a woman who had been pushed too far, and who might finally push back. The rollers were still warm against my scalp, pinning curls that had not yet fallen into place, when I reread the email for the third time, hoping that somehow I had misinterpreted the words, that maybe termination was part of a clumsy internal reshuffling or an error from HR. But no, it was intentional, clean, and cruel, like a knife gliding through fondant. Who fires someone in a wedding dress? That was the question echoing in my head louder than the stylist's humming or the muffled shuffle of bridesmaids laughing in the next room. I could still hear Ryan Caldwell's smug voice as I read the last line. Think of this as a parting gift, Harper. A clean slate before marriage turns you even more distracted. Distracted. As if my value had somehow diminished because I was marrying a man who loved me. As if saying, I do, would replace every deadline I had ever met, every crisis I had managed with grace, every moment I had stayed late in that echoing hotel ballroom, adjusting lighting and table placement until it felt just right. It wasn't just an email. It was a message that I had become inconvenient, that building a life outside of Caldwell hospitality was punishable, that my ambition was fine as long as it remained obedient. My phone buzzed again, this time with a Slack notification from Clara in sales. Just 3 words, I just heard. That told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a private conversation behind closed doors. It was a takedown, public and fast, the kind that spreads through group chats and whispers over cold brew in the break room. Ryan knew what he was doing. Timing the email to hit while I was half laced into my wedding dress and surrounded by people who expected me to beam like I was floating on air. He wanted me off balance, quiet, grateful even. But I wasn't built to smile through sabotage. I was built from late nights, from a mother who folded laundry between shifts and a father who never missed a Sunday dinner, from grit and long winters and quiet rage I had long since learned to swallow. I wanted to scream, But the woman next to me was adjusting my eyeliner and saying how lucky I was that the rain had held off. So I stayed still. I let her talk about florals and favors while inside my chest. Something sharp started to rise. Not grief, not yet, just the edge of it, the anger that came before the ache. I looked at myself in the mirror, veil draped over one shoulder, lips painted the soft red I had chosen months ago, and thought about how strange it was that I could be fired like this, stripped of my livelihood while sitting in lace and pearls, and still be expected to walk down an aisle pretending I was whole. But if Ryan thought this was a gift, he was about to learn what I did with things I never asked for. This was never about my performance. And the worst part was, Ryan knew it. He knew my numbers. He had approved the bonuses. He had shaken my hand after every successful gala, every 5-star review, every wedding that ended with tears of joy and thank you notes thicker than the contract they signed. I had given Caldwell Hospitality 7 years of my life, not the kind of 7 years where you coast and collect a paycheck, but the kind where you sleep with your phone on your pillow, answer emails at midnight, and memorize the difference between peony pink and blush rose because some bride halfway to a breakdown thinks her life depends on it. I showed up early, stayed late, solved problems with a smile and a clipboard, and trained more assistants than I could count without ever asking for recognition. I was the one who made sure no glass clinked out of place, the one who noticed when a groom was about to faint and slid him a protein bar behind the altar before the photographer could catch him wobbling. I wasn't just good at my job. I loved it, maybe more than I should have. But Ryan did not fire me because I failed. He fired me because I made it all look too easy. Because I was the face of his father's golden child property, and he could not stand the idea that the woman in heels running circles around his ego was not going to shrink just because he got a title he had not earned. What makes it worse, what makes my stomach not even tighter, is that I had been training my own replacement without knowing it. For 3 weeks, I had been showing Ryan's cousin, Avery, how to manage vendor contracts, how to log invoices, how to anticipate client meltdowns before they hit critical mass. I thought she was interning for experience, maybe shadowing before a new role opened in another department. She asked questions like a student, eager and wide-eyed, and I gave her answers like a mentor, not knowing every time I shared a shortcut or explained a process, I was handing her my keys one by one. She was kind, in the way someone can be when they are not carrying the weight of betrayal, and I liked her. That might be what stings the most. I liked her. And when the email came and I scrolled through the CCs, I saw her name in the thread, not with confusion or apology, but with a signature already updated to reflect my title. Harper Lee, Senior Events Coordinator, replaced like linen napkins after a spill. I felt like a ghost watching my own career get passed off like a clipboard, and even now, in the haze of white lace and champagne, that betrayal burns hotter than anything else. Because they knew I wouldn't make a scene. They knew I would keep smiling. They thought I would swallow this like every other bitter thing I have ever been handed. They were wrong. I should have been glowing. I should have been drunk on love and champagne and dancing barefoot under twinkle lights while my new husband twirled me across the patio. But instead I found myself in the bridal suite alone with the flickering screen of my laptop, casting a ghostly glow across my wedding gown, combing through emails that suddenly felt like evidence. The ceremony had gone on, because what else could I do? Call it off and scream at the altar, "Excuse me, everyone, but I was just fired?" No, I smiled and kissed Tyler and held his hand with fingers that trembled from something colder than nerves. I got through the first dance and the toasts, but my mind was elsewhere, chewing on betrayal like gristle that refused to be swallowed. When guests laughed, I laughed too, but it felt like watching someone else's life play out from behind soundproof glass. The second the music softened and people drifted toward cake and cocktails, I slipped away and shut the door behind me. I opened my inbox and searched for anything I might have missed. Any message from Ryan that hinted at this ambush, any meeting I had declined that might have been my silent execution. Every subject line looked familiar, every tone friendly, polite, even appreciative. That was the worst part. There had been no warning, just a casual silence that masked a loaded gun. I forwarded the termination email to HR with a simple question. Was this approved by corporate? Because part of me still hoped this was a mistake, some overreach Ryan would be scolded for, reversed with an apology and a formal reinstatement. But another part of me, the sharper one, the one that had grown up watching my immigrant parents get walked over for the sake of keeping the peace, knew better. I read the message again, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't stop. I was trying to feel something definitive, anger, or clarity, but all I had was a growing sense of rot. Tyler came in, loosened his tie, and sat beside me on the velvet settee where I had been curled up like a storm cloud in tulle. He rested a hand on my back and said gently, "Baby, maybe you should let this go for tonight. It's our wedding. You can deal with this on Monday." But I couldn't, because I knew how these stories usually went. You wait too long, the trail cools, the truth gets buried under polite emails and HR jargon. I looked at him and said, "If I don't respond now, it becomes normal. They get to rewrite the narrative, and I'm just the girl who didn't take the hint." He sighed but didn't argue. He knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't built to lie down quietly. So while the party continued downstairs, I stayed up here in a designer dress with creases at the knees, writing out everything I remembered, because if I was going to burn, I wanted the match lit by my own hand. The music was thumping beneath the ballroom floor like a second heartbeat, and I had only just returned from the bridal suite with my mask of a smile reattached when I caught the tail end of a conversation I was never meant to hear. It was by the bar, where the scotch flowed heavier than the champagne, and a group of guests had gathered in that loose way people do when they are tipsy enough to forget what is polite to say out loud. One man, maybe late 40s, dark navy suit with a finance firm's logo on his lapel pin, leaned closer to his colleague and said, almost laughing, "Isn't that Ryan Caldwell? That prick from Central Operations? I thought he got sent to the West Coast to play boss for a while." Nepotism at its finest. I froze mid-sip, the bubbles from my Prosecco suddenly sharp and bitter on my tongue, because I knew that name, of course I did, but the rest of it hit like cold water. Ryan Caldwell was not just my boss. He was the son of Conrad Caldwell, the founder and CEO of the very hospitality empire that had cut my paycheck for 7 years. The man whose framed photo hung in the executive hallway, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. The man who once called the staff his chosen family during a holiday address, streamed to all properties. That was the lineage I had been up against. This wasn't just poor management or a petty HR mistake. This was blood. This was entitlement dressed in tailored suits and empty apologies. Suddenly, everything snapped into place. The way Ryan had strutted through meetings without offering solutions, the way his ideas got praised even when they echoed my own from 3 weeks earlier, the way he had casually tossed out phrases like legacy and stewardship as if we were all just placeholders in his family scrapbook. I had thought he fired me because I had become inconvenient. Now I realized he fired me because he could. Because someone like me, a woman who worked her way up without connections, was never meant to sit at his table. The wedding buzz around me grew louder, clinking glasses and polite laughter. But I stood still, heat crawling up the back of my neck. The man from finance turned toward me briefly, unaware that I was the bride, and muttered, "Spoiled little monarch. Probably thinks his last name is a get-out-of-accountability card." I wanted to shake his hand, thank him for naming the thing I had felt but couldn't frame. Ryan wasn't a manager. He was an heir. Untouchable, shielded by a father who likely saw him as the future of the brand, and I was just collateral damage. Disposable. The realization didn't break me. It sharpened me. Because now I knew exactly whose attention I needed to get. And I knew better than anyone how to plan an event that no one would forget. The email arrived the morning after the wedding, timed for 9 a.m. Sharp like a punch, disguised as a handshake. A message from Caldwell Hospitality's HR department with a subject line so sterile it almost made me laugh. Severance package and next steps. I was still in the hotel robe, hair damp from the shower, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup because I could not bring myself to return to the real world yet, when I opened the document attached and felt the floor tilt beneath me again. They were offering me a severance package, generous on paper, enough to keep most people quiet for a good long while. But the strings attached were knotted so tightly I could practically hear them creak. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement that barred me from discussing my termination with anyone outside of legal counsel or immediate family. The language was clinical, all polished marble and dim boardroom lights, and I could feel Ryan's fingerprints all over it. The urgency was what set off the alarm in my gut. There was no mention of performance issues, no record of misconduct, just a pre-written narrative they wanted me to adopt like a script they were betting I would be too stunned to challenge. And for a moment, I almost said yes. I hovered over the reply button, fingers poised to type, because I had just gotten married, because I had bills and a mortgage and pride, because silence seemed safer than noise. But then I thought of the years I spent bending over backwards for this company, of the interns I mentored, the mothers of the bride who cried in my arms after I fixed what no one else could, the 1,000 invisible things I had done that made Caldwell's reputation gleam. And I thought of Ryan lounging behind his desk with that smug half-smile, knowing I would be too professional to cause a scene. This NDA was not about protecting the company from slander. It was about protecting him from consequences. It was a hush order dressed up as a farewell gift, and the longer I stared at it, the angrier I became. Tyler walked into the room, towel around his neck, asking if I wanted to go out for brunch, and I said not yet, not until I figured out how to answer the people who were trying to pay for my silence. He watched me closely as I reread the file, and when I looked up, I said out loud what I had not yet admitted to myself. Something isn't right. It was more than intuition. It was in the way the email avoided specifics, how it never mentioned Ryan's name, how it spoke in terms like transitions and opportunities as if I had chosen to walk away. But I didn't walk. I was pushed. And now they wanted me to pretend it was a gentle nudge. I closed the email, took a deep breath, and told Tyler I would not be signing anything. Not yet. Not like this. It started with one Slack message, half visible in a screenshot Camille had accidentally captured while trying to explain a discrepancy in the event's budget. A blurry header that read, Q3 adjustments, personnel streamline, and beneath it, my name listed with a small red line through it, like I was an item being crossed off a grocery list. Camille and I had been friends since the early days when we both got hired within the same week, and she had stayed tucked away in accounting while I built my world in events. But we always met for coffee on the fourth-floor terrace when the weather was good, and we always shared what we weren't supposed to say out loud. When I told her what had happened, she had gone quiet at first, then said in that slow, careful voice she used when she was holding something dangerous, "Harper, I think there's more." What followed was a slow unraveling of digital breadcrumbs, scattered pieces that meant nothing alone but together formed a path I hadn't realized I had been walking blindfolded. Internal calendar invites for strategy meetings that used to include me, but now listed only initials and vague labels like Key Transition Group. Performance review drafts where my name was highlighted, but comments were left blank. A memo marked confidential that referred to optics alignment and refreshing brand identity through strategic personnel transitions. Camille, God bless her, dug deeper, pulling flagged expense reports and quietly accessing meeting minutes that hadn't been scrubbed yet, and what we found hit like ice water down my spine. Phrases like reassess legacy female leadership and align front-facing roles with emerging demographic trends. They were planning a purge. Not just of me, but of every woman in a senior position who didn't fit the new image they were building. Women with opinions. Women who were too loud or too visible or too unwilling to nod and smile while younger. Sleeker faces were handed our work with fresh titles. It wasn't personal, not the way betrayal usually feels. It was calculated, sanitized, run through a spreadsheet until it looked like strategy. I wanted to scream, but screaming would have done nothing in a company that measured worth in marketability and saw experience as a liability. This wasn't just about me being fired. This was a pattern. A machine built to replace loyalty with aesthetic, to reward silence and punish history. And I had spent too long building something real to be erased by a line in a memo. Camille looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're not crazy. They're doing this. They just didn't think you'd notice." And that was the thing. They were right. I wouldn't have noticed. I would have signed the NDA, thanked them for the severance, and faded out like they wanted. But I had seen the pieces now, and I could not unsee them. They had underestimated the wrong woman. And they were about to learn that erasing someone does not mean she disappears. Conrad Caldwell was the kind of man who gave keynote speeches at hospitality conferences with phrases like people first leadership and inclusive brand legacy rolling off his tongue like they were stitched into his DNA. The kind of man who wore cufflinks, shaped like puzzle pieces, to symbolize unity, and who posed in glossy PR spreads with the bellhops and janitorial staff as if to say, "I see everyone, even the ones you don't." I had never met him in person, but I had watched him on stage at 3 consecutive Caldwell hospitality summits, had quoted his sound bites during staff onboarding presentations, had even once defended his decision to implement parental leave across all departments before it was trendy. He was the benevolent face of the company, 63 years old and still sharp as a tack, a man whose reputation was so carefully curated that even his mistakes felt like strategy. And so when I pieced together the quiet dismantling Ryan had orchestrated, I couldn't help but wonder if Conrad knew. If he had seen the Slack messages, the sanitized memos, the hush orders disguised as severance packages, if he had signed off on the erasure of the very people he claimed to uplift, or if, like so many men in polished offices, he trusted his son with the keys to the kingdom and never checked the damage left behind. I sat with that thought for a long time, my laptop open, cursor blinking in a blank email draft that felt heavier than it should. My heart raced with the kind of fear that comes when you poke at a giant and have no idea if it will step over you or crush you for the trouble. But I couldn't unsee the truth, and if Conrad Caldwell really believed the things he said on stages, then maybe he needed someone to remind him of what those words were supposed to mean. I kept the tone professional, polite even, no bitterness, no threats, just facts. I included the timeline, the screenshots Camille had helped me gather, the pattern of exclusion and manipulation that had unfolded beneath his nose. I labeled everything clearly, outlined the strategy in their own words, the ones they never expected would leave the safety of their private channels. And at the end of it, I wrote one sentence that cost me more than I expected. I believed in this company. I believed in what you said we were building. Then I signed my name, attached the files, and stared at the send button like it held the fate of something I couldn't quite name. Tyler walked in, saw my face, and didn't ask questions. He just sat beside me in silence as I pressed send, unsure if the message would ever land in Conrad's inbox or be intercepted by a team built to keep people like me out. But in that moment, it didn't matter. I had told the truth, and sometimes that is the only power you have before the world decides what it wants to do with it. 3 days passed with the kind of silence that makes you question whether anything ever mattered at all. The kind where you reread your sent messages too many times and check your junk folder just in case a reply slipped through the cracks, though deep down I didn't expect one. I told myself I had done what I could, that even if the email went unread or was buried under layers of executive gatekeeping, at least I had said it out loud. But on the 3rd afternoon, just as I was folding laundry in the quiet of our apartment, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. No caller ID, no name, just 10 digits and a feeling that made my chest tighten. I answered with a cautious hello and heard a voice I recognized immediately from conference videos and leadership interviews. "This is Conrad Caldwell," he said, calm and clipped, like a man who never wasted words. "Do you have time to meet?" I didn't say anything at first, the shock catching in my throat, but when I managed a yes, he gave me the name of a cafe in Midtown and a time an hour from now. No assistant, no reschedule, no pretense. Just him. I changed quickly, heart pounding so loud I could feel it in my ears, and when I arrived at the cafe, he was already there, seated in the far corner in a charcoal blazer and pressed shirt, looking exactly like he did on stage, except older somehow, more human. He stood when he saw me, offered a handshake that felt too firm to be casual, and gestured for me to sit. I did. For a moment, he just looked at me, not with the impatience of someone checking off a task, but with the curiosity of a man trying to put a puzzle together. "I read your email," he said finally. "Twice." I nodded, unsure what to say. He opened a manila folder I hadn't noticed beside his coffee, and inside were my screenshots, my notes, my annotations, printed and highlighted like a dossier. "I appreciate how thoroughly you documented everything," he said. "It's clear you care about this company, or at least what it was supposed to be, And then, almost under his breath, he added, "This is not how we operate." I watched as his jaw tightened, his eyes moving across the pages again, lingering on phrases like optics alignment and brand modernization through personnel refresh. When he finally looked back at me, something had shifted. My son made decisions he had no authority to make, and he did it behind my back. That ends today. The fury in his voice was not loud, but it was sharp, like frost cutting across glass. I sat there, stunned, as he stood and buttoned his jacket. "You'll hear from my office within the hour. And Harper," he paused, "thank you for not letting this get buried." Most people would have walked away. He left before I could respond, and I sat there with a half-drunk coffee and a whole new storm just beginning to rise. The official email hit my inbox before sunset, this time from Conrad Caldwell's direct assistant. No HR filters, no polished detours, just a clear statement that an internal investigation had been launched and Ryan Caldwell had been placed on immediate suspension pending review. It felt surreal reading those words. After everything, after the silence, the betrayal, the fake severance wrapped in a gag order, and I sat in the middle of our living room with the email open and my phone buzzing with texts I had not seen in weeks. Camille was the first to reach out, sending a single line that made me laugh for the first time in days. "Well, you shook the damn tree." I didn't reply right away because I was still watching the ripples unfold, still catching my breath as names I had seen listed in the same secret memos started popping up in forwarded chains. Voices I had thought were too afraid to speak now, sharing their own stories, their own exclusions, their own paperwork. It was like pulling the thread on a blouse you assumed was made well until the whole thing began to unravel right in your hands. The next day, I got another call, this time from someone higher in the corporate structure than I ever thought would know my name, offering me my job back. Not just the title I lost, but a promotion, and a seat at the leadership table I had never been invited to before. I listened quietly, let them finish the offer, let them talk about opportunity and rebuilding trust and setting a new tone for the company, and when they finally paused, I told them no. Not because I wasn't grateful, not because I didn't feel vindicated, but because I knew what it had cost me to get to this point, and I could not walk back into those glass-paneled offices pretending the view had not changed. I told them I had something else in mind, something that had started forming quietly during all those nights I sat in silence with too many questions and not enough answers. I wanted to build something better, a space where voices like mine were not exceptions but expectations, where mentorship wasn't performative and leadership wasn't inherited like property. They asked if I was sure, if I needed more time to think, but I had already thought enough. Sometimes a no is not a rejection. Sometimes it is a door you finally choose not to walk through again. After I hung up, Tyler poured us both a drink and said, "You just turned down everything they thought you wanted." And I smiled because he didn't say it like a warning. He said it like a victory. Because they had tried to erase me and I had not only survived it, I had changed the weather. They wanted to hand me a title like a consolation prize, but I had already decided. I was going to build the whole house myself. I had always carried the idea quietly, like a folded piece of paper at the bottom of my purse, something I would glance at now and then but never dare to unfold completely. It started as a whisper years ago when I noticed which clients got prioritized, which vendors were always just a little too whitewashed, which stories made it into the company newsletter, and which ones disappeared before they could be written. I thought about all the small businesses I had worked with who couldn't afford the high-end rates, but whose work carried more heart and authenticity than any luxury florist could package. I thought about the women who trained entire departments and still got left out of group photos, about the vendors who brought their daughters to set up days because childcare fell through, about the people who made the magic and were never invited to the table. And now, with the power shifted and Ryan sidelined and Conrad watching closely, I decided to finally say it out loud. I didn't want my job back. I wanted a new one that did not yet exist. I drafted a formal proposal and named it the Lighthouse Division, a nod to visibility, to guiding without overtaking, to standing firm in rough water. It would focus on inclusive leadership training, ethical partnerships with vendors whose values aligned with equity and sustainability, and community-driven event planning that centered experience over appearance. It sounded idealistic. I knew that. I expected Conrad to skim the deck and offer polite praise before shelving it for a future that never came. But instead, he called me within hours. His voice was quiet, measured, and when he spoke, it was with something that almost sounded like regret. This is what I always hoped someone would build. I just never thought it would come from inside. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to fill it. I want to fund it personally, he said. I don't want this buried in budget red tape. I want it to stand on its own. And just like that, the paper I had kept folded for so long was real, pinned to a wall in my mind and starting to cast shadows. He offered me full autonomy, a startup budget, office space, and the freedom to hire my own team. I thanked him, not with tears or grand words, but with a simple promise. I would build something worthy of the trust he had just extended. After we hung up, I stared at the name on the proposal and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just starting a project. I was unlearning the version of myself they tried to convince me I had to be in order to succeed. I was choosing the kind of leader I had always needed. And this time, no one would be able to fire me with a smile and call it a gift. The email came late at night, long after I had closed my laptop and sworn to give my brain a break. The kind of hour when quiet feels like safety and anything that interrupts it is either a mistake or a storm. At first, I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another automated reply or a newsletter I forgot to unsubscribe from. But then I saw the sender's name and sat up straighter. Avery Caldwell, Ryan's cousin. The same woman I had trained without knowing I was walking her through the job that was about to be stolen from me. My stomach flipped, not with rage this time, but something more complicated. Something like dread, tangled with curiosity. I clicked it open and found a message that did not begin with a formal greeting or a polite excuse. It began with an apology, a real one. She wrote, "I am so sorry, Harper. I didn't know until last week. I had no idea what Ryan was planning or that I was being used to replace you. I believed I was shadowing you for a lateral move to New York, not to take over your position in Denver." Her words were straightforward, but there was weight behind them, a kind of bruised honesty that made me read slower. She said she only found out the full scope after the internal investigation began, that someone in HR had accidentally copied her on a message about strategy containment, and from there, the pieces had started falling into place for her just like they had for me. She admitted to feeling humiliated, complicit by association, and then she did something I did not expect. She attached screenshots, messages between Ryan and another executive, threads I had never seen, the kind of back-channel chatter that revealed everything their polished statements had tried to hide. One message read, "We'll get Harper out clean. She's too tied to the old branding. Avery's easier to mold." Another said, "No risk. She'll be distracted with wedding stuff. We'll spin it as restructuring." I stared at the words like they were written in a language I had never seen, even though I understood every syllable. It was all there, the strategy, the timing, the certainty that I wouldn't push back. Avery ended her email by saying she had already submitted the messages to the investigators, that she felt it was the least she could do, and she hoped I could one day forgive her. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it, let the anger simmer, not because of her, but because of how many layers there were to the way I had been pushed out. It wasn't just personal, it was engineered. I didn't know yet if forgiveness was possible, but I knew this much. Avery hadn't just apologized. She had handed me a match, and now I knew exactly where to strike. I found out about the video 3 days after it was posted, not through some viral surge on my own account, but from Camille, who texted me a screenshot of the view count with nothing but the words, "You're everywhere." I had no idea what she meant at first, and for a brief, stupid second, I thought maybe something I said in a press interview had landed weird, but then she sent the link. It was a TikTok, low res, shot vertically from the back of the reception hall, and it showed me, laughing with a guest, champagne flute in hand, veil slightly off-center from hours of movement. There was text over the video in all caps that read, "This bride got fired on her wedding day by her boss, who emailed her mid-makeup," and underneath, in smaller font, "Guess who her boss is related to?" My stomach dropped. The music in the background was the upbeat pop hit from our first group dance, and the caption just below the video said, "She still danced anyway. Queen behavior." The comment section was flooded. Thousands of people tagging friends, sharing their own horror stories about workplace betrayal, about being discarded right before maternity leave or pushed out the door for calling out harassment. Some comments were angry, some were heartbreaking, and others were pure fire. People were calling me the anti-hero they didn't know they needed, the new face of quiet defiance wrapped in tulle and lip gloss. Hashtags started appearing under the post and then all over the platform. Number fired bride, number NDA never again, number she still danced. It was surreal. I hadn't asked for any of it. I hadn't posted a single word about my firing beyond the initial email to Conrad and the internal documentation. But somehow, that one guest, a friend of Tyler's cousin, had overheard a conversation during dinner and decided the world needed to know. At first, I was mortified, convinced it would all blow back on me, that the company would find some new way to silence me, that I would become a joke rather than a symbol. But as the video passed 1 million views and then 5, something changed. Journalists started reaching out. Former employees from Caldwell sent me their own stories, things I hadn't known, things that painted an even clearer picture of the rot hidden behind the brand's polished front. People were watching. People were angry. And I wasn't hiding anymore. Tyler took my hand one evening while we watched the view count tick higher on his phone and said, "You didn't start this fire, Harper, but you sure as hell lit something bigger." And he was right. I didn't ask to be a headline. I didn't ask to be anyone's rallying cry. But maybe the truth has a way of finding its light, even in the middle of a wedding dance floor, even through the lens of someone's shaky phone camera. And maybe, just maybe, it was finally time to tell the rest of the story myself. The apology came on a Tuesday morning, dropped like a wet stone into the middle of a pond already rippling with outrage. Ryan posted it to LinkedIn first, probably thinking it would look professional there, then mirrored it on his Instagram story like he was offering up some noble reflection, rather than a frantic attempt at damage control. The post was exactly what I expected, and somehow still worse. He opened with a vague nod to recent events, never once mentioning me by name, and described what happened as a result of miscommunication and internal HR restructuring, painting himself not as the architect of my firing, but as a well-meaning leader caught in a tangle of unfortunate timing. He used words like regrettable and misunderstood, said he was heartbroken that his actions had been misinterpreted, and ended with a declaration that he remained committed to fostering a culture of growth and accountability. I read it once, then again, and each time I felt the familiar chill of being rewritten in real time by someone who had always assumed the world would take his side. But this time, the world did not. The comments started slowly, polite at first, the way people try to give someone a graceful exit before realizing the room has caught fire. Then they turned. Executives from smaller firms withdrew their affiliations. Influencers who had once tagged Caldwell Resorts in dreamy wedding shots posted black screens with captions about ethics and silence not being neutral. A popular bridal planning account shared my story with the caption, "This is why we read the fine print. This is why we speak up." Clients started canceling bookings. A destination wedding in Hawaii that Ryan had once bragged about landing posted a public statement announcing they had pulled out and were taking their business elsewhere. The press caught wind, and soon the story had spread past TikTok and wedding blogs into business sections and op-eds. Everyone suddenly wanted to weigh in on what it meant for a woman to be fired in her wedding dress, and what it said about the culture we pretend is modern while still being built on old bones. Then came the letter. Conrad Caldwell, never one to move impulsively, released a formal statement on the company's homepage and across all platforms. It was brief, direct, and unmistakable in its meaning. Effective immediately, Ryan Caldwell had been removed from all leadership roles within Caldwell Hospitality Group. The letter thanked those who had brought concerns forward and acknowledged the company's responsibility to do better. It didn't feel like victory, not in the celebratory sense, but it felt like something heavier cracking open. A reckoning maybe. A line drawn in permanent ink where before there had only been whispers and shadows. I didn't post anything that day. I didn't need to. The truth had already broken free and spoken for itself. And Ryan, who once called my termination a gift, was finally learning what happens when the box you deliver comes back with your own name on it. 1 year later, I sat across from Tyler at a candlelit table tucked into the corner of a little restaurant we had stumbled into during our honeymoon and promised we would return to for our first anniversary. Though back then we had no idea how different everything would look by the time we did. I wore a navy dress instead of white lace. No veil, no cameras, just a quiet glow in the air and the kind of smile that sits deep in your bones when you know you have nothing left to prove. The waitress brought us 2 glasses of champagne, and when she walked away, Tyler raised his and said, "To starting over." I clinked mine against his, and for a moment, I let it settle in. What we had survived, what I had built, what I had walked away from without looking back. The Lighthouse division never became just a side project. Within 6 months, it evolved into its own company, Harper Lee Consulting, focused on ethical event planning, inclusive vendor partnerships, and corporate workshops on workplace equity. I hired Camille as my director of finance, and she brought the kind of clarity and heart every budget meeting had always lacked. I partnered with small, woman-owned businesses who had once been pushed to the margins by big-name firms that wanted sparkle without substance. I created a space where planners could breathe, where no one had to apologize for needing boundaries or rest, where talent was valued over polish, and where community was more than a buzzword in a pitch deck. And somehow, in between strategy meetings and media interviews and flying out to consult on a conference in Lisbon, I found peace. Not the kind that comes from closure, because I still don't know if you ever get that fully, but the kind that grows quietly after you choose yourself, again and again. Ryan disappeared from headlines in the way privileged men often do, quietly, without consequence visible to the public eye, but it no longer mattered to me. Revenge was never the point. The real win was walking through the fire and realizing I could build something entirely my own from the ashes. Tyler reached across the table and brushed his thumb over the back of my hand, the same way he did when I was unraveling last year, and I smiled because this time I didn't feel unraveled. I felt rooted. He asked if I missed it. The old life, the hotel, the title, the security, and I shook my head. I don't miss belonging to something that didn't value me, I said. I'd rather create something that makes space for people who were never invited in the first place. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the window beside us, and I felt the hum of possibility in my chest. Not loud, just steady. The kind that reminds you, even after everything, the story was never about who fired you. It was about who you chose to become next.